Hello and welcome to this episode of the Sticky Note Marketing Show. I am your host, Mary Czarnecki, and today I am thrilled to invite you to meet Jess Jensen. So Jess is our guest expert today, and she is going to be sharing exactly why senior leaders should not be going dark on digital. So if that is you, if you are a leader, if you have wondered how you could improve your presence, build your authority, and not feel overwhelmed when it comes to showing up online, this is the episode for you. So if you don't know Jess, Jess is the founder of Copilot Communications, which is a female-owned advisory based here in Oregon. So excited to have another Oregonian here on the show. And they partner with C-suite, senior executives, and ambitious founders to cut through the digital noise with clear, authentic messaging. So thank you, Jess, so much for being our guest expert today on the show.
Oh, so happy to be here.
Fantastic. Now, I know there are going to be people listening and watching to today's episode who will know you and are familiar with Copilot. But for those who might be meeting you for the first time, can you give us just a quick overview of how you got to founding Copilot Communications?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So my professional background is about around 20 years in a corporate environment. So I've worked for a series of Fortune 500 kind of larger enterprise companies. So everything from the CPG space like Nestle to footwear and apparel at Adidas. And then the last 13, 14 years really in the tech industry across Microsoft and Qualcomm. And so over the course of those kind of 4 chapters, I've really built a really nice kind of repository of experience and expertise in both digital communication, social media, marketing. So I thought last year it was time to pivot and step away from that larger corporate environment and do something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And out of that was born Copilot.
Amazing. Now, I know that one of the things that's incredibly valuable about your experience is the fact it does cross over a lot of these different industries. Like you said, CPG, apparel, technology. And so in your work with C-suite leaders, I know no matter what industry they're in, sometimes there's a common challenge, which is the leaders themselves have maybe some reservations about showing up online. So I'd love to get into that because I know we've got leaders listening to this episode who may themselves feel like, oh, it's okay if my company is online, or I know how to show up as my brand. But talk to me a little bit about, no matter what industry it is that you're working in, where have you seen the actual individual, the leadership hold themselves back from showing up online?
You're spot on. There are a lot of leaders that still feel that way. And I think the statistics I've read most recently share that before the pandemic, about 2/3 of leaders had a handle, had some sort of social handle, or had been on a podcast, had some sort of presence. But many of them were not consistently active, and many of them were not actually managing or involved in the day-to-day, which understandably so. At a certain level, of course, you're going to have a team to support you. And frankly, that's part of what I do with my clients, is help make them look good. But one of the keys that I can talk about here as we kick off is really drilling down into the why should I do this? And that's one of the places that I would start when I was doing the work inside of Microsoft and Qualcomm, is establishing just a common language around the why. Because frankly, like so many things in life, if you're not really bought into the why, then you're going through the motions and potentially it's not going to have the longevity that it really deserves. So one of the things that we would talk about is number one, authenticity, which I know that word is so overused, and I wish that I could find an alternative to it, but it's the right word. So they're, again, coming from originally a much more brand management kind of corporate marketing background, and eventually evolving my own career into working one-on-one with C-suite, I know what it means for any leader to feel like this is covered, right? We got a big marketing effort, there's brand building, there's paid media, there's a PR team. Like, I don't need to get involved with this. But there is something so valuable about the authenticity and the humanity that an individual person at any level, but especially when you have a platform at a senior level, that they can bring that really augments and is incremental to what your fantastic corporate marketing and PR team are doing.
And it's interesting too, because I hear you on that word authenticity, but it is true. People want to know the humans behind the brands, right? The humans behind the companies that they're willing to invest their time, energy, money with. I know in the workshops that I teach with my clients, where we're talking about that external communication and storytelling, it's important to be able to tell not just the story of the brand, right? The business, but then the people behind it. So when you're helping people or when you're first getting started with some of the C-suite leaders that you're working with, where do you see the biggest challenges? Like what are I hate to call them mistakes, but yeah, what are some of the mistakes they're making in that before picture, before you start getting involved?
Yeah, I think that one is, as I was alluding to earlier, just outsourcing it, offloading and saying that the corporate marketing and PR teams got this covered. We've got a website, we've got a social handle, we've got various other touch points, paid media. Why do I need to get involved? So I think that's number one is just, it's funny. It's almost, I don't want to say it's a confidence thing, although I have seen that with leaders, believe it or not, but it's almost like a feeling of humility in the best way. Like, I'm not that important. No one needs to hear from me. Why would we already have a bunch of other people doing this? And I think that's one of the conversations I've had so many times with leaders at this level is no, your point of view matters. They actually want to hear what you have to say. Talk about the idea of being a futurist, which is again, a buzzy word, but pausing to go, sometimes these people have been in an industry for 30 plus years. They have history. They've seen companies start up and merge and exit, and they've seen lots of players come in and out, industry changes economically. And so let's think about what you see maybe the next 3, 5, 10 years looking like in your X industry, because you probably have a perspective and insights that most people don't have. And that's really interesting. So leverage that as part of your humanity and authenticity and use that in a strategic way where you can influence multiple audiences, right? Because so many of us, we do, and certainly if you're an SVP or a CEO, you're talking to, at the same time, in many cases, you're talking to investors, you're talking to employees, you're talking to customers or clients, probably have some partners that are involved with your business. And then maybe even if you're at a certain size, regulators, right? Government regulators that could change the industry at large for you. So by having a digital platform across a myriad of mediums, we'll get into in a sec, that you can influence these really important key audiences with your own authentic voice in ways that you just can't do with a corporate brand.
And I think that's the emphasis. So as a reminder, if you are listening or watching this show, you need your sticky notes out because Jess is going to be dropping some golden nuggets here. So we want to make sure we're capturing those. But I think you make a good point is that don't hide behind, oh, I'm a servant leader, or I'm being humble. I'm letting the brand keep the spotlight. People want to hear from you. They want to hear from the human behind the business. They want to hear from the people involved in the brand. So I think that's a really good point. You mentioned though there, which I do want to dig into, which is the kind of portfolio of touch points, right? The ways and places that this can take place, right? Where you can show up. Because I know I do hear from a lot of the folks that I work with, Mary, I don't have a lot of time to do this, right? Like, how do I prioritize this? Or how do I decide what are going to be the places that are going to be important for me to show up? So how do you answer that? How do you start helping people think through what should their touch points be?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point, which is the scarcity of time. And that is, you asked earlier, what are maybe some of the mistakes? And I would maybe even add to that, what are the hurdles that these leaders face? And that is definitely one, is there's a scarcity of time. They're stretched, they're traveling, they've got so many masters. And it is often hard unless they're in a crisis, which is pretty much the worst time to build a digital platform. But it's often something like that that will push people to go, oh, my voice should have been a bit louder. I should have been building this before because I could have influenced some of those audiences we just talked about.
Yeah.
And I could have had a permission to be able to speak directly versus having to go through a corporate funnel. I do think that beginning before you need it, which I mean is like so many things in life, which I know is hard, takes discipline. You've got to carve out the time. Again, working with people like myself and probably you too, this is how you're able to get started, is to have some structure around it and a partner in crime. And that's what I would do when I was in-house as well. So to answer your question around this portfolio, I think that people naturally, because it's so visible, they right away go to social. And I get it. Social has become so dominant. But even let's just break down social. And I have 3 categories. So social, I think a lot of us, the terms owned, earned, and I use the word rented. So we'll set aside paid for right now. But I really see social as a rented space, right? I don't I don't own Meta, of course. I don't own X. I don't own LinkedIn, which is owned by Microsoft. I am there and I'm building equity and I'm building a brand, whether it's a corporate or an individual one. But at the end of the day, I don't make the rules, and tomorrow the whole thing could be shut off. So I'm renting the space. It is still a very valuable space, as we all know, because there are so many eyeballs there. But I think it's important just to keep that in the back of our minds. So I categorize social as rented and often more short form in terms of the kinds of content, right? We all know short attention span, under 60 seconds. Like you can only go so long on social. The second category is just this. So podcasting is a great example of what PR teams have for years called earned, right? I hope that I've earned this time on your show and that it's valuable to your listeners. We've obviously got a lot of the traditional sort of placement in print publications or digital blogs. I've got some background with podcasting, so I tend to lean into that with my partners, my clients. And I think it's also a really good complement to social because you can go so much longer and it feels very, I don't know about you, but because just maybe it's in my ear, it feels more personal.
Mhm.
And then the third and last one is owned, which really is going to take the shape of, if you're a company, it would be a website. But if you're just an individual, it might be a blog. And maybe that blog gets sent out via email if you're really taking it up a notch. But you own those names, right? You've written those things. And that is something that to me is the most precious because you can really get direct and controlled communication out to the audiences that have raised their hand and opted in.
I think that's such a great breakdown. And I love your emphasis on the fact that this is rented. Right? There are certain platforms that we don't own, we don't have control over, and who knows what we're going to wake up to tomorrow. So the importance, I think I'm hoping people are taking away from what you're saying about needing a balance of both, right? We're hedging our bets in terms of if you only show up on those rented platforms, if they disappear, if you lose access to that in any way, then you lose that contact, that impression. Do you have any fun stories? Just anyone that pops to mind in terms of a great example of someone who expanded beyond just the rented platforms and actually started some of those alternatives that you're talking about, either an email list or their own blog, that pops to mind as a great example of that?
Yeah, I think that I was actually just working with a client a couple of weeks ago who has his own blog. And it was surprising because, again, here he is a senior leader running a company or helping to run a company. And he was in many ways more prolific on his own blog, which of course, again, you could subscribe to and get through RSS feed or whatever. And I think it's because, if I had to guess, I would surmise, I think he likes to write. I think he has maybe a secondary or tertiary passion around writing that maybe isn't his day job. And so I feel like one of the pieces of advice I give to my clients, and I feel like this feels very natural, is go to the platform where you inherently feel the most comfortable because you're probably going to stick with it. You're going to take the time to get better and sharpen the sword and improve. And you're going to also come across probably less formal, less robotic. You're going to be more real. So for some people, I have another client that I've worked with. It's all about email, right? The social platform side of it is a little intimidating because I think there's just that how much response am I going to get? Am I going to get the likes? Am I going to get this? There's that a little bit of anxiety for, I think, some people about what's going to happen when I put this out in the public.
Yeah.
Whereas with email, again, I know people have signed up, even if it's only a couple hundred folks, but I know that they want to hear from me and I'm not going to get any negative heat from it for the most part. So I just believe, and I'm the opposite. I've grown up with social, so I tend to lean into social and then podcasting probably as my second. So I just think that the advice to give is, number one, let's start with one, because I would so much rather you go deep and really become as close to an expert and as comfortable as you can be on one platform, and then add on, build that portfolio little by little, versus what the term I've used for a while, and anyone that used to work on my team will laugh at this, is this peanut butter approach, right? So I'm just going to do a little bit of everything across 4, 5, 6 different places, just hope for the best. I don't advise that. I think it can be overwhelming and you really don't have the depth that you could have if you just focus on the one first that you naturally lean into.
Yeah. And I think that emphasis on what do you naturally lean into, what feels good for you is how you're going to start as you mean to go on, right? So if you hate writing, right? I'm from Jersey. I talk faster than I type. Let's be honest. So I that's why I loved podcasting. That's why I love teaching, right? I do workshops and keynote speaking because that's how I naturally like to communicate.
Mhm.
I've expanded, like you've said, over time because I know that the other formats are important. So hopefully you guys are writing this down, right? Jess is giving you some great formulas here, right? With intention, choosing where to show up because of the value of those different rented versus owned platforms, but going deep, being solid on at least one first before you try and adapt to something that may not be as natural for you.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
when it comes to showing up on any of those given platforms, though, I'm guessing that there's something that you work with your clients on that helps them, even if it's something that's naturally something they're comfortable with, like writing or speaking. How do you make sure it's the right kind of content? I know you use this term, I use this term a lot, that sticky content. How do you help them know what to say and how to show up?
Yeah, so first of all, the part of the process I go through with clients that I partner with is in the beginning, it's of course very strategic and thoughtful one-on-one work. And then we get into kind of the operations and how we implement. And then we get into the content creation and the publishing. So it's a one, two, three.
Mhm.
And that first phase is really important. It's easy for any of us to skip over, but it's almost like the equivalent of I'm going to redo my house and I'm not going to actually get an architect or a designer to make a blueprint or to a rendering. I'm just going to start knocking walls down and just see what happens. Most of us would never do that. But with our digital platform, there's a lot of people I think that just jump in and just wing it.
Yeah.
And again, that's all good. But if you're at this elevated level, if you have people who are potentially following you, whether they're employees, their partners, clients, you maybe want to spend a hot second to get your strategy in order. So one of the things that really informs making sticky content is first figuring out and I'm sure you know this term too, but what we call a narrative platform. And so really a fancy way of saying, what do I want to stand for publicly? And how is that both, again, germane and natural to me? It needs to be number one, otherwise, that's not going to work. And then two, how is it of service to ideally both my current company, but also, frankly, just to me and my future prospects? Because most of us are not at the same company our entire career. And setting yourself up to really stand for, even if it's just two, three, four themes that are really meaningful to you, but again, serve maybe your future self. Getting those written down, I do a process where I obviously talk to the individual in quite a bit of depth and ask them to do some self-auditing and share with me. I also talk to often three of the people that they've recommended I interview. So it might be, say, a former boss, maybe an employee, maybe a peer. And I ask about specifically this person's communication approach, their communication strengths and maybe opportunities. And it's really, every time I do it, it's really fascinating because you definitely start to see patterns. And so those patterns, again, inform that narrative platform. If everyone is telling us that you have a clever wit about the way that you talk and write, let's incorporate that into your narrative platform. Don't erase that. So I think that creating sticky content is about being you and having a little bit of a strategy and a framework before you start pulling the trigger. Again, it's that one platform, master it, and then you can atomize, you can spread out. I also think I love the kind of three E's paradigm, which could apply to this format, but certainly social and email. Either be entertaining me, helping me to emote, so driving an emotion,
Mhm.
or educate. So like right now, hopefully we're providing some good education. Hopefully it's also a little entertaining. But there are other times when driving an emotion, we saw a bunch of that with the Super Bowl spots, of course. A lot of that's very emotional. And so I often go, let's use that as a filtering mechanism. And when we go to create content in whatever format, video, copy, whatever, audio, make sure that we're checking one of those boxes because those are the things that people are going to engage with. They're going to feel like it's serving them, providing value. And then ideally, they're going to share and pass it on. And that's going to help just grow your audience.
Amazing. I think I always love the three E's as a reminder too, because it's also a reminder, I think, for me. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm happy to have a healthy debate here. But when I see content that is trying too hard to do too many E's, right? Okay, it's like you just said, we're giving some education, hopefully in an entertaining way. But you also have to be knowledgeable or aware of how much are you asking any given piece of content to do for you, right? Do you see that as true? Sometimes people put too much emphasis on, or too many responsibilities on one given piece of content.
Yeah. And that was the case even pre-social, pre-digital, like in the early parts of my career back when it was still print ads and TV spots.
Yeah.
The same thing would happen, right? You would get too many people giving input, too many logos, too much copy. Enough. Like less is more. There's certain brands that have mastered this, right? We know who those are. So it's the same principle, because at the end of the day, this really gets into human psychology.
Yeah.
People have limited attention spans. They want to know what's the one thing I should take away from this, whether it's a feeling or again, it's knowledge. Don't overcomplicate it. Just you have to earn. Seth Godin talks about this all the time, sort of permission-based marketing, earning the right to take someone's attention for even 10 or 15 seconds, let alone like a 20-minute podcast. You have to earn that. And if you're overwhelming, people are just going to opt out.
That's amazing. First of all, hopefully everyone has that image burned in their brain of please don't start knocking down walls in your house before you have a plan, right? Let's build the blueprint first. Let's decide why we're doing this in the first place. So please definitely listen to Jess, because I have witnessed way too many people start to knock down walls, and physically, but we'll talk about that on another episode. All right. So one of the things that I want to touch on before we wrap up today is just how to get started. Because I know you've probably sparked some light bulbs for folks listening or watching today who are saying to themselves, yeah, I haven't been consistent, or I've been hiding, or I've been not showing up in the places or in the ways that feel good to me, that will establish my authority in the right kind of way going forward. So for those people, I'm guessing jumping in and just running right away may not be the best way to get started. So when you're thinking about the folks listening today who may be ready to go, what do they have to make sure that they have in order first? Or what advice might you give in terms of making sure they have their foundation set first?
Yeah, I love that. I definitely think that if we're talking about a social platform, then there is just goodness in having your house in order. So besides having a narrative platform and building a strategy and some of that work I talked about that I do with my clients to help build really a paradigm, a structure that we can keep going back to, on the kind of operational side, there's certain things you just want to make sure logistics are covered, right? So again, if we're talking about, let's just say LinkedIn, which is a really commonplace for a lot of C-suite leaders, profile photo, cover photo, your bio, your titles, dates, just get all that cleaned up. Feel really good about that, because you're going to drive a bunch of traffic to it. Make sure there's no broken links. Any media you've uploaded that might be a couple years old, let's make sure that's refreshed and updated. And then even things like settings, get your notification settings the way you want them. There's ways you can turn off and on things like, I don't want every single person who's a connection to see every single move I make. If I misspelled the and I fix it and then it proliferates out to my entire network, not necessary. So turn those off. And I guess maybe just a few kind of more philosophical takeaways or best practices that I would leave your audience with. Going back to that notion of imperfection is relatable, and humanity at the end of the day is what you're trying to build and exhibit. And that's what's going to draw people to you. And especially now in the era of AI, there's so much artificial and frankly mediocre content that's now being created, that the way that you cut through that is actually by being human, imperfect, relatable. So don't let go of that. Don't feel like just because you're at a certain level of leadership or you work in a certain size corporation that you have to be this sort of robotic, perfect, sterile self. That's not what people want to hear from you. And then start with that single channel, like we talked about, focus, go deep and get that one right. And then you can expand from there. And then don't be afraid to share a point of view, right? Again, people want to hear what you have to say. Now, the one watch out and the coaching that I used to do in-house was there should be a certain short list of things we want to stay away from, right? We don't want to share material, non-public information about our company. We want to probably avoid controversy. As you grow and you get more followers, more comments, you might get some troll behavior. It's natural, it's normal. Like just walk away, right? Just don't get involved. Keep it on the positive. And lastly, I would just say that really putting your audience at the forefront every time you go to publish in any format. How am I being generous? How am I shining a light on the accomplishments of others or offering value to my audience so that at the end of the day, they feel like I was doing this to be of service to them?
I love that. All right. So, in wrapping up today, and I love the point you just made because this is related to this, I always like to know the human side of you, right? Because obviously, Jess, you've shared some great advice with us, sharing your expertise in the service of our audience today. But I'm guessing that part of showing up as a human is not just being the expert, right? So tell us a little bit more about the human side of Jess. What do you like to do when you're not helping C-suite leaders?
Yeah. Okay. So two of my favorite things, and they actually balance each other quite nicely. So number one is I live in, as you mentioned, we both live in Oregon, and I love going out to the Willamette Valley, which is Oregon's Pinot Noir and more Chardonnay wine country. So I spend it probably more time than I should with friends and family going out wine tasting and just being out in beautiful rolling hills of the valley. And I think I like it partly because it really does force me to step away and just take in the beauty that is the Pacific Northwest. I love wine tasting. And then to balance that, I also am a cyclist. In fact, I'm training for a big ride in June this year. In the winter, especially, I'm a big Peloton girl. And I love Robin Arzon, my favorite instructor. She's become almost like a little guru for me. She's just such a tough cookie and reminds me that you were one of her favorite, my favorite things that she says is she'll say, you were meant to be uncommon. And I love that because it gives you, again, this permission to be the best version of yourself, even if that doesn't look like everyone else around you. That's okay. In fact, it's probably better. So I love to hop on a bike.
Amazing. I think that's a perfect quote to pass along to the audience today, listening to what your message was, that to show up as human, even if that's a little imperfect at times, but to show up, period. To not hide behind feeling like the company can take the spotlight and we can come off, but to actually show up and hold that space for yourself as a individual, as a leader in your organization.
Well said.
Amazing. Well, thank you again, Jess. So appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise with us here on the Sticky Note Marketing Show.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me, Mary. It was awesome.
Amazing. And thank you all for listening and watching and joining us on this episode. If you have a topic you want us to dig into next, reach out to my team at support@maryczarnecki.com. And who knows, maybe your topic is going to be the next up in our series. So thank you so much. See you all on the next episode.